Right, today I'll talk about the outlook for a December 2025 US Fed rate cut, because this is pretty crucial for us to understand and plan, how we are going to trade the majors. And for those that are still new to the currency world, majors here are the any major currencies. When I talk about this, are the currencies that's traded versus the US dollars. And what I've listed here, they are collectively known as the majors. Okay, so Powell's post-meeting signals. Now, before the meeting, traders had largely assumed another cut in December was a done deal. Now, Fed Chair Jerome Powell's message struck a cautious tone after the late October 2025 meeting, now tempering expectations for another rate cut in December. So in his press conference, Powell emphasized that a further reduction in policy rate at the December meeting is not a foregone conclusion, far from it, as stressing that policymakers had strongly differing views and no decision would be made until more data are in. Now, Powell also highlighted unusual uncertainties, notably on an ongoing federal government shutdown that temporarily halted official economic data releases. Lacking fresh data is keen to driving in the fog, he said. You slow down, hinting that Fed might pause further move if it's flying blind. Okay, so here are the probabilities. If using the FedWatch tool for December 2025. Now, prior to Powell's comments, futures had priced in roughly a 90% chance of a December rate cut. However, after the Fed's statement and Powell's press conference, the implied probability of a cut plunged to about 56%. The following day, FedWatch shows roughly a 74 to 75% probability of a 25 basis point cut at the December 2025 meeting versus around 25% probability of no change. Now, currently, FedWatch shows a 63% probability of a 25 basis point cut at the December 2025 meeting. Now, this means markets still lean in favor of a cut next month, but with far less confidence than before. So, if you're hoping for the cut, we better not see this dropping to a coin cost. Okay, so that would mean a 50% chance. I don't want that if you're looking for that cut. Okay, so for those that are still new to this CME FedWatch tool, I've been looking at this for the past 4 years, easily doing this report, and every time we have a probability that surpasses 70%, the chances are very high that would be the result that's going to come out. Okay, so be on the lookout for that. Now, as for Polymarkets, right? What are the odds? Currently, Polymarket odds are very much in line with futures, about a 66% chance of a quarter point cut at the December FOMC meeting versus roughly 32% for no cut. Now, the market assigns only a tiny probability, i.e. 3%, to more drastic scenarios such as a larger 25 basis point, more than 25 basis point cut, or any hike. As you can see from here, 2% chance for a 50 plus basis point cut and a 1% for a 25 basis point hike instead. Okay, so before the October FOMC meeting, Polymarket odds were at 85 to 90% for a 25 basis point cut prior to Powell's remarks. Now, the total wagering volume on Polymarket's Fed December market has been heavy with over 9 million, indicating keen interest and active trading. So in short, Polymarket currently leans towards a December rate cut, but with significant hedging, reflecting a market that is cautiously betting on easing but acutely aware it could be wrong if the Fed's resolve on inflation hardens. Now, as for the macroeconomic factors supporting a December rate cut, Several macroeconomic trends and data points bolsters the case for the Fed to cut rates in December 2025, as they suggest policy might be too tight and the economy could benefit from some easing. First of all is the cooling inflation trajectory. Inflation has moderately substantially from its peak. The annual CPI, Consumer Price Index, was about 3% as of September, which is up slightly from 2.9% in August due to a bump in gasoline prices, and the Fed's core PC inflation measure was last officially around the mid 2% range, with the Fed's projecting it to end the year near 3%. Now, importantly, Powell noted that the risk of higher, more persistent inflation has declined significantly since April. Core CPI has stabilized at 0.3% monthly, matching consensus but indicating deceleration. Now, more significantly, the shelter components of CPI and the largest contributor to inflation dropped to 0.16% monthly, a sharp slowdown from the 0.3 to 0.4% range seen earlier. So when analyzed, these figures equate to an inflation pace of under 2%, suggesting core pressures are normalizing. Now, this represents inflation falling like a rock, as over 51% of CPI components are now deflating from its peak, a level well above the long-term average of 33%. Now, this supports the view that underlying price pressures are easing broadly, not just isolated sectors. So with long-term inflation expectations still well anchored and only temporarily upwards blips from one-off factors like tariffs, the Fed has covers to consider lowering rates. So the bottom line is this: barring a negative surprise, the scale tips in favor of a 25 basis point rate cut in December 2025 as the most likely outcome, but it is a tentatively tilt, not an assured one. Now, the decision will depend on the late arriving economic reports and how the Fed interprets the foggy data landscape. Now, speaking of shutdown, Polymarket show that markets only assign about a 10% probability that the shutdown ends next week. The most probable outcome is at 52%, and it happens after November 16, so that's still another 3 weeks away, yeah? So probably 2 weeks away. I was writing this report, it was just 3 weeks, okay? So be on the lookout, and we still have time actually for that to happen, because the Fed has said that they don't want to fly blind, right? But by December FOMC, based on this probability, the shutdown probably would have been lifted, and we would have all the data released at the same time. Now, that definitely will create some volatility, but I believe based on the data that we have right now, it's showing that inflation is coming down, and I think the Fed would probably be okay to cut rates by December. But anyway, this is just a probability. We still need to wait for the Fed, who is ever they have, Powell is really a very data dependent chair at the current moment. Everything he says is just data dependent, and that's it. So whatever it is, just be a bit patient, and the moment we have shut down, I think the volatility will be here and we would have a clearer idea. But right now, CME, FedWatch 2, Polymarkets, they are pointing towards a probable rate cut in December. Okay, so with that, that's a report for today.